I'm Brian Sethurst in Los Angeles.
And I'm Alison Norrington in London, and welcome to the Story Hour.
The Story Hour sits at the intersection of storytelling and technology. We bring you the story behind the stories, how it's written, how it's produced, how it's distributed, even the personal stories behind the storytellers themselves.
We talk with the master writers, producers, directors, authors, and technologists, covering it all from film and television to literature, virtual and augmented reality, and more, as well as the innovations in production, technology, and distribution that are changing the how of storytelling.
Today, we are thrilled to talk to a veteran entertainment industry showrunner, executive, and consultant who, over the past 20 years, has helped guide traditional and digital networks through branding, launching, and scaling their content and companies. She's been at the helm of top-rated programming for American networks CBS, Bravo, BET, A&E, TLC, and more, created groundbreaking patented production software, and championed diversity throughout the industry, including founding the Hollywood Diversity Network.
As a strategic consultant, our guest today helps people find their blue sky and then design a clear game plan to reach it. She's a motivational speaker and trainer to solopreneurs and leaders in the private, non-profit, and public sectors, giving you, and I quote, the steps, support, and strategy to finally do the darn thing.
An active member of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, the Producers Guild of America, and American Mensa. We are thrilled to welcome DMA. Welcome, DMA.
Good morning. Hello.
I'm
Good to be here.
we have been so excited to talk to you, even after our pre-call. Allison and I just kept talking. I wanted to say when we were selecting guests that my personal experience. I mean, we're reading down your bio, and I'm thinking of how I know you and how I've met you, and that you've acted as my coach on reality television, and most recently in a startup I'm working with. I had a question for you that was plaguing me in the sort of how to. And in like 3 minutes, I knew exactly what to do next. You made a recommendation, and not only that, when I turned to the team to tell them, everybody was like, of course. So I just want to say I'm
Yay.
glad to have you here today because out of my experience with you, that is something that I want to share with any writer, producer, director, and anyone that's even starting a business, like the same principles that apply. And the one thing I want to start and end our whole conversation with today is this one phrase that was on your website, which is success isn't a dream, it's a decision. So that is the context
Absolutely.
of our discussion today. I'm going to turn it over to Allison to start our interview. Allison.
Sure. Hi. So yes, I mean, there's so many things I want to speak to you about, and probably more than we have time for in this session. But what I want to do first of all is wind back to your TV days, because
Sure.
you've had some great roles for some of the heavy hitters in terms of the networks. How did you get into television? Was that a dream? Was it a decision? Like, what's your path to TV?
It absolutely was not a dream. I think that's really important for anyone at any age who thinks of this career as something that's a fantasy that you hope the best for and throw spaghetti against the wall for. I was working in the entertainment industry in New York, and I was acting and writing plays. And I was absolutely sure that my calling was to write for the theater. And I was on a national tour, and my sister sent me a newspaper clipping about something called the Disney Writing Fellowship. And this was a very big feature writing fellowship that had a few spaces for television writers. And I loved television and thought, oh, I would love to do that. I'll do that for a year. I'll go home to California and then I'll come back to the theater. And I literally sitting backstage every single day, hand wrote in a notebook a spec to submit for that. Having no idea how competitive it was, having really no idea what it meant to write for television, but thinking that seems really nicely aligned with being a professional writer. And I got selected. I was one of the handful of TV writers that got selected. I spent the year here, and then between writing and television and coming home, I didn't go back for about 20 years. So I got my start as a writing fellow.
Great. Can you remember what the story was that you submitted?
Absolutely. This was back in the day when when a spec script was an actual sample of an episode of an existing show. And so
Right.
I wrote a Seinfeld spec about a singles laundromat on the Upper West Side and how their stories all intersected around that. If I recall, Elaine was ovulating. There was a lot going on. Uh, and it was absolutely based on the singles laundromat right down the street from my house on the Upper West Side. So
That's
even
fantastic.
back then, I understood that writing what you knew was
Yeah.
always the best way to an authentic script.
Wow. In terms of you writing for the stage, right? Because you came from theatre background, what differences did you see immediately off the bat from writing for stage compared to writing to television?
There was no immediacy in television. I think there's this very clean pipeline for theaters. Sorry, for playwrights, for people
Right.
who work in the theater to television, because both of them are so rooted in character. And
Yeah.
so I didn't know at the time how in demand playwrights were. And I don't know that I ever even mentioned that I was out there, trying to get my plays produced. But there was absolutely that direct connection to starting from the character and writing out for the authentic character. But in a play, I got to write that, and then you brought it to your workshops, and you were having readings, and you were trying to get it staged. Versus here, just trying to get onto a staff. Certainly back then, it took over a year.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I wanted
Ryan,
to,
did you ever?
yeah, I wanted, so, the theater, this is, in my experience, writing for the theater, the writer has all the power and it's a collaboration
Mhm.
with the director. And I do believe that in VR, it's kind of turned back to that. But people in Hollywood, it's really the director, and not in television, it's the showrunner,
Right.
correct, that drives that. And in film, it's actually the director. So
Absolutely.
when you started to look at the entire industry and where that was where you started, and where two things: one, where your heart was, and two, where
Mhm.
you thought you would be most effective and most successful. How what was that path?
I will say I was so young that I was still, I was still in my 20s, so I was still walking through open doors, and it was something that my family had raised us to do that served me very, very well. When doors open, walk through them. You don't have to close it behind you, or or jump on elevators and go to the 30th floor and move in. But I was just exploring, and I loved writing at the time. And in my first season on my first show, a friend said, "Have you thought about producing?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm a writer." And to be honest, I did not have any idea what a producer was. And so when she kind of talked me through what a producer was, I thought, that is even more aligned with who I am in terms of like organizing things, juggling plates, being more of the big picture person, but I'd never heard of it, so I would never have known to pursue it. So this was one of those kind of happy choices. I decided to become a writer. I did the things you have to do to become a writer. And then when somebody suggested being a producer and I learned more about it, I thought, okay, how does one become a producer? And I set about, doing that. So I've been very deliberate, but the through line of it has always been, am I using all of my skills? Am I actualizing myself to the fullest in the space I am in? And when you start, that's been the case. And then over time, you realize, oh, there's so much more as I understand this world I could be doing. And then you start looking for the role that lets you expand with all this newfound self into that next role. And I think that's why my career has changed and changed and changed, because as I've learned things and discovered things I love, I was always looking for ways to express that professionally. And that very rarely means staying where you are.
I see
But it seems to me
you.
like you're very awake, right? Sorry, Brian, you're very awake and you're very aware, right?
I
I
am
heard
now.
an expression a couple of weeks ago, and somebody claimed that they was a dehypnotist, right? And they said that the people walk through life hypnotized. And this guy said, I am a dehypnotist because I'm trying to wake everyone up to be aware of what's going on.
I love that. And I would really say it was the biggest shift for me was getting that I had to be extremely outcome oriented, which I can articulate so well now because I worked in tech. But back then, I just knew I felt that if I was just going through the steps in front of me, I wasn't necessarily seeing the big picture and I could be missing things. And I had this extreme, what they would now call FOMO, right? I was always curious about what the biggest possible picture was, so I could make decisions based on that. And that comes up time and time again, where before I made a leap, I would literally jump on planes and go talk to someone who was kind of at the pinnacle of where my current path was leading. And then I would ask myself, do I want to be there 5 years from now? And if not, boy, would I pivot.
Did you know those people, or did you just say, listen, that's a person I want to talk to, so I'm going to reach out?
I sometimes knew them, and if not, I knew how to get to them. I definitely knew how to get to them.
And have you noticed, I mean, I've noticed through my career that those people who are genuine are really willing to share what their experience was, just like you have been. Was that your experience, or?
Yeah, because I was coming with such great intention when I reached out to people. And it's something I always ask of people. Probably dozens of requests a week for generals. Hey, can I hear your story? Hey, can I tell me everything about how you came up? And I actually just kindly just decline and point out the ways that I do that, which are scaled, right? The monthly sessions and blah, blah, blah. But my story doesn't necessarily help you get somewhere. So I'm much more interested in people who've already taken steps and then are reaching out to me to fill gaps where my expertise could actually get them somewhere. And that's kind of connected to that extreme outcome orientation.
I want to talk for a second about filling in those gaps
Yes.
because the first book, the showrunner book, that's I can't remember the title. Please forgive me.
Oh, that's the second book, Showstarter. Showstarter was my second book.
Like a freaking
Yes.
Bible. I recommend that to so many people. But it appears to me, just as long as I've known you, that when you see a gap or you see a better way of doing something, you set about to do it. So I would love for you to
Yes.
talk a little bit about those experiences, not just with Showstarter, but with the production software, because I knew you when you were building that production software. And when you said, well, this, and I won't mention the name, this doesn't do this, and this doesn't do this, and this doesn't do this. And I don't know why it doesn't or why they didn't think of this, but I'm going to make this so that it does. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Uh, Before lean methodology ever entered my geeky, nerdy tech background, but we are connecting tech to storytelling, so I'll drop lean
And I
here.
might ask you
I
to
really
just preface what lean technology is first,
Yes,
in case
yes.
people don't know.
So before I knew it was called lean, I just called it cycling. I like to start with wherever I was, look at where I was trying to go, and say, what's the quickest way I could get there? What's the smallest thing I could do to get myself there, right? And that's, the formal title for that is the minimum viable product, right? The MVP in lean. But I just called it tiny tests. I would always tell my team, we're just going to do a tiny test. And you would just alter like one little piece of the process. Even as a showrunner, I was driving my story producers and field producers crazy, right? They would come back and say, well, we don't have enough turnaround time to get all of the transcripts and turn those into scripts with the network schedule. And I would say, I bet you I could write a macro that would let you mark up the transcripts, and then you would be able to automate turning those into a first draft. And my producers would look at me like I was nuts. But every once in a while, one or two would say, okay, I'll try it, because they had to. And then they would come back and say, I wrote a script in 20 minutes that used to take me 2 days. And I'd be so excited. And I was like, we should make software. So I was always trying to see if this is where we're trying to go. There's 3 things you can ever move. Can I change the people? Can I change the time, or can I change the money, right? Those are the 3 kind of impact / influencers on process. And for me, all 3 of those were impacted most effectively by changing technology. So for me, when I was trying to originally run shows and then sell shows, and you were running through, the massive checklist of trying to sell a show, which included 15 versions of every budget, every schedule, every cash flow. They were operating off of 3 different software programs. And I remember sitting and just saying, and it always starts with that thought, this could be easier. This could be so much easier. and then writing down what would make this easier, and then, because I'm a nerd, actually building something to make it easier. So a lot of my ability as a writer, then producer, then showrunner, then production company owner, and certainly as an executive, came from seeing the things that were slowing people down or making people irritated or sad, and saying, could I fix this with another person, with more time, with more money, or could I create all of that efficiency by handing them a tool? And that wouldn't change anything else. And that was always my approach. And sometimes people thought it was awesome, and sometimes people would just look at me and just say, can I please just use a Post-it note?
You know, the I just want to Showstarter is available at your site, correct?
Absolutely.
So the Showstarter, and I'm not blowing smoke here. This is a must read. Even if you are already in reality television, it is a must read. And I have to say, just when we were working on this one particular show, I was absolutely certain I was right. And you gave me a piece of advice and I fought with you. And
That's
you picked your battles very carefully. Like, I think you knew that making me wrong was not going to change my mind, but you also
absolutely.
knew that you were at the point where I had to learn that lesson for myself. Like, there was nothing more you could do. You had handed to me, and it was like, you didn't say, listen, I'm telling you from all my experience, that's not the way to do it. You didn't. You let me have it. It was a tough lesson for me. And one of the lessons was, if someone is willing to mentor you, you look at, like you said, you talk to the people where they were, where you wanted to go. If someone is willing to mentor you and they're giving you the time, and in this particular case, we were paying you, though. So this was like, we're
You
paying
were.
you for your time, and I still didn't want to listen, you know? And I remember that against one other thing that was told to me was when I wrote a pigtail for Simon & Schuster with Olivia Newton-John, first children's book that I had written. And they came back with the edits. And my partner at the time said to me, and I said, they're ruining my book. And he said to me, let me ask you this. How many best-selling children's books have they published? And I said, obviously a lot. And he goes, and how many best-selling children's books have you published? And I said, none. And when you said that to me and I learned my lesson, I was like, again, why didn't I listen? So, I mean, here you're offering all this guidance in this book. You've taken this knowledge. The production software you have just makes life so much easier, and it is not difficult to learn. I think there's a reluctance on some people's part to shift over because you've used this or you've used, I can't tell you,
Absolutely.
just in my own experience right now, I've been using Celtics to write instead of Final Draft.
Yes.
And I
I've heard
absolutely
about that.
love
Yes.
it. And I can't get people to move. It's like I constantly have to convert things back because I can't get people to move. And I keep saying, this is an online collaborative tool that is better than what exists. So I'm here to endorse Planet DMA's soft production software. So I'll get off my soapbox
Oh.
for now. But I also wanted to talk about shift for a moment because
Yes.
we're all so busy. And Allison and I said to her immediately, you have to download this. And I looked at this
And
journal.
I have.
Oh, thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about shift right now? And actually, I'm gonna give us a shot of your. Oops, that's wrong. There we go. Give you a shot of the website now, so that you can explain a little bit about it and why it's so valuable.
Absolutely. I'm going to use the same language. I always like to start with a tiny test. What's the smallest thing I can do to change things? And then you try and figure out what's the optimized version of that so it's stable, so I can consistently help people. And then the next step for me is always, how do I scale? How do I scale? How do you get more people and more outcomes? And so I do a lot of strategy work, as you know, and it's very, very labor intensive. And it's not labor intensive because this is difficult work. It's labor intensive because getting people to be able to make the change is the hardest part. It's a famous flight I once took up to my alma mater when I was in the middle of another software launch. and went to talk to the president, who I'd been close with as an undergrad, to say, how did you get this massive institution to change? And he could not recall any way he had done so. And that was hilarious. And it brought me back, on the plane to say, let me think about this differently. I don't want to get people to change what they're doing. I want to get people to change what they're focused on. If you only think about the process that this is the software I use, this is the way I write, this is how I want to approach selling a show, you're kind of locked in the middle of the outcome, not at the biggest possible picture, right, Allison? The blue sky we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't help anyone get where they're trying to go as long as the process they're trying to follow is their outcome. I want to say that one more time, because this was life-changing for me and has been life-changing for the clients. You will not get where you're trying to go as long as the process has become the outcome. We're going to host this event again this year. No, the goal isn't to have the event. The event was supposed to raise funds to end this illness, or the meeting was supposed to solve this problem, or, as long as we fall in love with the meeting, the event, the process has become the thing. You're never going to get where you're trying to go. And so I kept having people contact me, I kept having people contact me to help them. And then we would talk about where they were trying to go, and they would say, well, I'm trying to launch this nonprofit, or I'm trying to start this film festival, or I'm trying to start this company up. And I would stop and say, great, if you did that, what's the win? Because that's the real outcome you're trying to get to. What's the thing you're actually solving for that this thing might be a solution for, but we're going to think of 5, 10, 15 other things to relinquish the stranglehold on the how you're going to do it, and to free up to, by any means necessary, this is where I'm going. And then I discovered how many people fought that approach. And then I took Shift, which was a lot of my teachings and my Instagram and all of that. And now, before I will take a client, I actually say, you have to read and complete this workbook. And when you have read and completed the workbook, we will have a free 15-minute consultation. And if that goes well, then I would consider you as a client, because it has to be a fit on both sides. And so few people move ahead after they read and complete the workbook, because it is a very big decision to go out and try to create change. And if you are really kind of just like, well, no, I just wanted to start a program, or I just wanted to start a nonprofit, but you look at how big of an undertaking that would be, and you still haven't created change, you might reconsider and work with me to do something much smaller. So I wrote that book to get people to stop creating infrastructure instead of creating change, because that is a trap that people fall into all the time.
We're nearing the end of our first segment, but you set us up beautifully for the next segment, which is all about creating change. And we want to talk to you about the current environment that we're in and what that means for writers and artists and even technologists. I just want to put in another plug for Shift, because in reading it, the questions you ask are, many of them are questions I ask myself, and I wonder if that's because I've known you. But these are questions that people don't often think. You don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know what question to ask yourself, you might not get the answer that will get you to the outcome. And this is a free download, and it will, whether people work with you or not, this is like a gift, because in reading through it, I'm going, oh God, of course I should have answered that question. I went right over that question in my mind, and it was just a simple little thing. It's almost like not having the right brick in the foundation, so your building goes like this.
It reminds me though of the cartoon, right? There's a cartoon, you may have seen it, and there's like a speaker on a podium, and he says to a crowd of people, who wants to change? And they've all got their hands up. No, who wants change? And they've all got their hands up. Right. And then he says, who wants to change? And they all put their hands down.
Absolutely.
And something in there that I want to talk to you in the next segment about changing behaviors and changing systems. And by changing a system and a methodology, it maybe feels less personal for somebody than they're changing their behavior because they're following a system. And that's something that I'm really interested in. Maybe we'll pick that up in the next part, if that's okay.
I love it. Yes, let's do it.
So we're going to ask everybody to tune in for the next segment, and we'll be back.